Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Conscious Grief series. My name's Tara Nash, and today I am joined by Miriam Jacobson. Welcome, Miriam.
Thank you.
Miriam is a functional medicine dietitian, a breathwork facilitator, and the founder of Everybody Bliss. But when Miriam was 13 years old, her father was tragically killed in 9/11. This is what we are going to talk about today, your father, Stephen Jacobson, and how grief and trauma has impacted your life. So thank you very much for being here, Miriam. Miriam and I actually know one another from a writing class, a memoir writing group. And that's how we connected. And I've heard your writing about your grief and what has happened to you. And you recently were published in Huffington Post because it was the 20-year anniversary, right? So there's lots and lots for us to talk about. And it's a big question, my first question, but how has grief manifested in your life?
Yeah. And first of all, thank you so much for having me. I think it's so important to be able to have these types of conversations because it's not something that's talked about a lot. And it's something that I personally have avoided for a big portion of my life. So Tara, as you mentioned, my dad was killed in 9/11. And for me, grief has transformed in so many ways throughout my life. And right after 9/11 happened, I was in so much denial, and I completely dissociated from everything. My mom was actually diagnosed with breast cancer like 3 weeks after 9/11. And so I just completely retreated and I was like, I'm fine. I put a smile on and I was really scared to feel my emotions and to feel my grief. Because I thought that if I did, I would fall into a black hole and I would never find my way out and it would just swallow me. And so I buried it. And the grief, when I wasn't emotionally addressing it, came out as physical pain. I think that we absorb trauma and grief and memories in our bodies. And so I was having like stomach pain. I was having really bad migraines. I was 13 years old. And I would like sleep 14 hours a night. Like there was clearly something physically wrong. And then as I got older and I was ready to go to college, I was like, I need to get out of the East Coast. And so I went to Wisconsin for college, and I was like, oh, I'm just out of New York. I get to like run away from these issues and from my past. And it was actually the opposite. A lot of people in Wisconsin asked me, they're like, oh, like you're from New York City. And I think it was still close enough to 9/11 where people are just curious. And I think just like a little oblivious to the fact that like it really happened to real people. And so they were like, oh, where were you on 9/11? Or like, did you know anyone who died? And I would just like freeze and I would have like a full body panic attack. And it happened enough times where like I started drinking a lot and I started trying to like avoid it. And then I was like, I'm going to die if like I keep living like this. And so I pretty quickly, I asked my mom to see like a therapist. And so that was like the first time that I really like got help for the emotional and mental aspects of the grief and the trauma. And a lot for me is like very interwoven. So that was really powerful. And I'll tell you a little bit later, like what we did together. But then, grief transforms throughout our lives. And when I think I was like 25 years old in 2013, my mom passed away. And so she actually had lung cancer, and we found out I read about this in the Huffington Post article, but it was a 9/11 related cancer. And so then, again, it's like reprocessing grief, how it impacts when you lose both parents, right? Like what's the dynamic then? What does home mean, right? Like everything becomes redefined. And then, I think that it has shown up in my life in happy times as well. You know, when I got married, I felt an enormous amount of grief and loss. And then a few years ago, this is like, I feel like it's like almost like a crazy story, like telling it, but I was actually diagnosed with breast cancer 2 years ago, which is also a 9/11 related illness. And so it's from all of the environmental toxins that we breathed in. And so it's very well documented if like anyone wants to look that up. But then again, I was like hit with grief, not only like losing my breasts and losing my body parts, but then like wanting to connect to my mom, you know, and ask her about her breast cancer experience. And so I think that it's just, I think it manifests in so many different aspects of our lives, especially when we're not really expecting it to necessarily, because there's that like big event. And then there's all these different ways that it unfolds in these like micro ways in our lives that we're not always aware of until it happens. And you're like, oh crap. Yeah.
I know you have been through such a tremendous amount of grief at such a young age, Miriam. And it's really, it's interesting that the work that you do as a functional medicine dietitian and a breathwork facilitator, and you're, you know, the, like you were saying, the physical manifestations of grief that you were mentioning, like the exhaustion and the headaches. So when you started your healing journey, you talked about therapy, having talk therapy. Were there any other modalities of healing that you also found helpful?
Yeah, so it started with talk therapy, and my mom was actually working with someone with EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So she was very adamant about finding me an EMDR practitioner in Wisconsin, where I was. So we were working through that modality. And there were actually some issues with it. Like I would like dissociate a lot and I wouldn't be able to go to those places. And so we would have to stop. But beyond therapy, nutrition actually helped me find a lot of like balance in my physical body for like those physical issues that I was experiencing. When I'm kind of skipping around timeline here, but when my dad first died and I was like not wanting to talk about it, I was getting a lot of body work done. So I actually had acupuncture and chiropractic work. And I think that helped me move a lot of stuff physically that I wasn't able to go to emotionally yet. And as I've gotten older and as the years have unraveled, I found movement is really helpful. So I first found movement through yoga and then like through running. And now I've been lifting weights in my home and cycling. I think writing has been incredible. And breath work has just been like an incredible container as well for allowing me just to like release all of the emotions and just be authentically me and like not worry about going to those deep places because we like close it up nicely afterwards. So those are, I think, the most powerful modalities. And I think that there's so many tools available and different tools come in handy in different times. So I'm not saying like go out and do all of those things. I just kind of organically, I think, found a lot of those things to be helpful for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing those, because I'm such a believer in trying different modalities, as you say, and it's great to hear how you have tried so many and used so many to really support yourself, and that we have to kind of make time for these practices, because grief really can become a toxic illness. And I was thinking back to that, you know, your parents passed away very early in your life. And how do you think that sort of shifted your perspective on life, would you say?
I think it changed everything. It really is, because my dad died when I was 13 years old. And I think it just completely fundamentally changed my entire outlook on life. And I actually don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. For a long time, I was like, this isn't fair. You know, like I've done my time, you know, like the self-pity kind of place that a lot of us go to, which I don't think is always a bad thing. Like, I think it's really important to allow ourselves to be authentic in our experience and feel what we need to feel. And so this isn't like a bypassy thing at all, but I'm just, but I've also really changed as a result of those losses. And I've learned a lot about myself. And I actually wrote about this in the HuffPost article, but just like how I can take these like acts of hate and I can take these traumas and I can alchemize them and I can shift them and integrate them into creating a better life for myself, into learning more about myself, into helping other people and being able to hold deeper space for them, because I've also gone there myself. And so instead of like feeling really defeated, I'm trying to think about how has this enriched my life as well. And I don't think I would trade who I am. I don't think I would know who I am had I not had those losses. And also like I've been finding a lot more ways to be in community. And I've put a lot of emphasis on friendship because I don't have a lot of that blood family. I have like a handful of blood relatives. And so I think that community and connection is so important in terms of healing and, finding purpose, like in my life, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I'm hearing a lot, community and connection, as you say. It's such a key component of healing and fight, again, being in a supportive space. If you go back to what you were talking about, the Huffington Post article, which was a massive thing.
Yeah.
How did it feel like producing that piece of writing and sharing that with the world?
Yeah, it was honestly such a celebration to be able to share it. I have spent so many years like hiding my story, and because there was a lot of attention on us after 9/11, and I was this like 13-year-old girl and like the world was staring at us. And so, that's why I was like, I have to be okay, but I really wasn't. And I spent so many years like hiding this part of me, and being able to just even craft that story and create my own meaning from my own losses. It was like, felt like a reclamation. And then to put it out in the world, because I always also was like, my story is too much. Like, it's going to be too much for people. And it's going to be like, because when I would share that with people, I ended up always holding space for them. People were like, oh my gosh. And then like, I'm just like rubbing their back. Or like, I had a friend actually recall recently how at my dad's memorial service, my mom and I were comforting the people that were there. And she was just like, I can't believe like that you were put in that position. And so the HuffPost article was like a way where I was able to center my experience and share my own truths and being unapologetic about it. I think people can be, I think it's fair to warn people about like, what can be triggering or activating for them. And also like knowing that we're all responsible for our own emotional well-being has been really powerful for me. And so, so it felt really actually great to share it.
I completely relate to what you're saying about having to console other people. I would often find that, having also lost my dad when I was younger. And sometimes I would just lie to people that I had a dad, because I just would think, oh, it's just, it's so uncomfortable receiving other people's reactions, because they just wouldn't know what to say. And then you end up consoling them and holding space for them. It's so true.
Yeah. And it's such like a lesson in boundary setting too, like now where I'm at with like my grief process, like I can set those boundaries, but back then it was really hard because I hadn't come to terms with it myself, which I don't know if that's.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's, well, first of all, I don't think I really knew what a boundary setting was until much later. If that was even a term in the 90s.
Boundary.
But I mean, it was making me think of, so yes, I think it was pretty much about 21, 22 years after my dad died that I started to really consciously deal with my grief. And I feel that I had such a delayed reaction to it. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on now being an adult, being a bereaved child, and that length of time that it may take us to confront it?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on that. I feel I hate that quote, the like time heals all wounds.
Yeah,
because it's just so not true, and at least in my experience and in my body, and it sounds like for you as well. I think it's really important to be tender with ourselves in our grief, but I think there's a middle ground where we do need to address it. And so for me, it took me 5 years after 9/11 to deal with it. Just, I think the trauma accelerated a lot of the stuff that I could have otherwise avoided. And I think that we need to, be conscious about what's happening in our bodies and our lives in order to be able to show up. But I think that there's also a time and place for that. I don't think it's like always a good time to grieve, or like you should, as soon as something happens, like jump right back into it. Like, I think that there is something about being tender with yourself and coming to it on your own time. I think that some people will spend their lifetimes avoiding it and not dealing with it. So I think that there really is a middle ground though. And I think like dropping in and listening to your body as your guide can be like the best way forward.
Mm-hmm. And I know that it's kind of, I know that the breast cancer you said was attributed to a lot of people from 9/11 got breast cancer from, I guess. Do you want to talk about that a little bit from the?
Yeah. So there were I think it was like 10 million tons of asbestos and PCBs and dioxins and chemicals that were released into the air when the towers fell. And so actually a lot of first responders are coming up with these really rare cancers and really rare conditions. Like scleroderma is one of them, where your arteries harden. Like a lot of first responders years later are developing these issues. Cancers are another. So it's not just breast cancer. There's like a lot of different cancers. Breast cancer is up there. I think lung cancer is up there. A lot of people have developed GERD, esophageal cancers, scleroderma, like I had mentioned. And so there's lots of different ways that I think like the chemicals can manifest in our body. And I do think that it's probably a function of like the stress and trauma combined with genetics, combined with the environmental piece of it. But yeah, it's just astonishing when you realize the impact that it has. And I grew up like 1.5 miles, 2 miles from the Twin Towers. And so every day I was breathing all of that stuff in at a developing young age, right? 13 years old, when I was going through a lot of hormonal shifts. And so that undoubtedly impacted my body.
Yes. And how long have you been in remission for now?
I don't think I'm technically in remission. I think remission starts at 5 years. So I'm still on like hormone treatments, and I had a double mastectomy 2 years ago. And so the cancer is gone, but I don't think I'm like technically allowed to say I'm I'm in remission until 5 years, but let's just like go with it.
Like you say, that's just another incredibly traumatic thing that you had to go through. And then bringing up that grief again, that's what happens. Like one grief then triggers old griefs. And that, I imagine you must have missed your mum enormously at that time.
Oh yeah. I wanted her to be with me. Like I wanted the love, I wanted the information too, and the stories and how it felt in her body and what I could expect. There were a lot of things, a lot of different layers to that.
And I know that you are writing a book, like really writing a book, not like kind of how I do the writing group, but
we're all writers.
So tell us about your book and how you're feeling about that. And
Yeah. So I'm excited to be writing the book. I'm actually starting next month in January. We're in December right now. January. I am taking a sabbatical. So I own a private practice where I do like nutrition counseling and breath work. And I'm actually taking a step back from my client work next year so that I can focus on writing, because I've been writing and working on the outline all year. And what I've noticed is that I like need a lot of emotional space to process. It takes a lot to, as I'm sure, like, writing can stir up a lot of like old grief as well. And so I've realized that it's hard for me to focus on all of it. But yeah, I'm almost done with my outline and I'm going to start my manuscript next month. And it's like terrifying leap, but it's exciting because this is one of the first things that I've really done for like myself, like the first like big space. I've always channeled my healing work like outward. I'm like, I'm going to use my grief and all these experiences to help other people. And right now I'm just like, like my energetic limits have really shifted after I had cancer. And I was like, I need to channel this inward right now. And it doesn't mean that I won't come back to it, but I just know in my body, that's like what I need. So, and it feels good to just reclaim that, especially living in this capitalist world that puts like an emphasis on production and like you're worth what you produce. And so just breaking out of that has also been kind of a struggle. So, yeah.
Well, I really acknowledge you for doing that, taking the big leap, taking this time for yourself. And it's true. It's very, very emotionally exhausting, going back into the past and, unearthing things. But I imagine it's also going to be really deeply healing. And again, just taking back more layers. And grief is not something that ever goes away, I don't think. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that it's a lifelong process and it's a constant redefining our relationship with it too.
Mm-hmm. And that it's going to be a really like redefining your relationship with your parents in a way as well and bringing them back. And I think it's just well, this was my experience from when I was writing about my parents in our group. It really made me reconnect with them. And it was like a mourning a really beautiful way of mourning them. Do you agree?
Yeah, I was actually thinking that before you said it. I've written small pieces here and there. Like I haven't started the manuscript, but starting to like write about my parents, I was like, oh yeah, it brings back old memories too. And it really does feel like it brings it back to life. And our writing teacher was interviewing a writer. I forget who, but they were talking about how they were upset about like finishing their book because like they felt like they like brought their family back and then the book was done and they like had a hard time wrapping that up, which I think is really interesting too. But yeah, I think that it's a beautiful thing and I'm excited to see like what comes of it because I have the outline, but there's so much discovery still to happen.
Yeah, I can see how you might feel sad about, well, endings are often sad.
Yeah.
But what was I wanting to ask you? There was something else. Sorry, I've lost going back to the writing. No, I've lost it. What wisdom would you impart to someone about conscious grieving, Miriam?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think time doesn't heal all wounds. Like we need to show up. We need to show up for ourselves with tenderness. I think working with a therapist or a mental health counselor or in community groups in connection with other people, I really believe is how we heal. I don't think that we can heal alone. And it was interesting because for me, when EMDR wasn't working and when I was like dissociating, I actually have the same therapist that I had back then, which is really a beautiful thing. And we were talking about that. And she said something that really resonated with me, and that we can only move as deeply and go as quickly as the scaredest parts of ourselves, which I thought is such a beautiful piece of wisdom. Because we can't, like, I am someone who's like, I'm going to show up and I'm going to like push and I'm going to do it. I'm going to commit myself. And I realized that like my type A tendencies doesn't move grief faster. It actually can do the opposite, right? It can push us into a place of dissociation. And so I think just like inviting curiosity, but also inviting like gentleness and tenderness and softness can be a way where we can like move past those points of resistance. But again, it is like a lifelong practice, and it's going to show up in our lives in so many different ways. And so just really like staying curious about how that can morph and change and shift is also something for a lifelong journey.
Yeah, I really love that. Staying curious, being in a place of curiosity about everything, the good things, the bad things, and all that they have to teach us. But I remember now what I was going to say. It was we were talking about mourning our parents through our writing. But it strikes me now I have all this knowledge about grief, that I just didn't really mourn my parents until more recently, which makes me feel a little bit sad, but you know, also that it's never too late to grieve and we can do that now. And I just wondered, was that similar for you? Were there things that you and your sister, or, you know, did things after they died to remember them, or included things, or kept personal things like jewelry and clothes and things like that?
Yeah. So I think it was really different for both of my parents, because after my dad died, like I was just in so much shock that I don't think I mourned either. Like, I think that's a really interesting point. I was actually talking to a friend of mine recently, and her dad unfortunately passed away. And she was like, oh yeah, like I took a month of grievance leave. And it was the first time that I ever heard of grievance leave before. I was like, oh, like you can do that? You know, like I never even considered taking time off, because I've always just pushed through those experiences. So I'd say that it took me a long time to grieve my dad. In some ways, I don't think I still have, and I'm like still working on that. In terms of like my mom, I think I realized what avoidance and waiting did. And so I actually jumped straight into therapy, like right after she had passed away. And with my mom, you know, she was obviously the last parent left. And so we had her home, and it was my childhood home. So like I still had my childhood bedroom. And so going through all of those items was actually incredibly therapeutic. I wish I took a little bit even longer. It took me 1.5 years, and I still wish I took like a longer time. But she was an artist. And she exploded in art and creativity after my dad died. She was a really big like testament to like how we can change when we grieve and when we lose someone. And she just like owned herself. Like she like knocked down walls to like create more art space for herself in her house. And so we had like 2,000 square foot of like floor to ceiling art that my mother created. So we had to divide that up. But like, so now I think you can like see like paintings behind me. Like I have my mom's art everywhere. I have like her jewelry and stuff too, but the art is something that like I hold so near and dear. I kept a bunch of her art supplies just because it helps me feel closer to her when I'm doing that. And I love like the idea of like our hands and creating things like is an extension of our hearts. But for me, it was like really the artwork and the portraits. And like I have one up here of me and my sister and my mom that she painted. It's watercolor. And so it's just a really like special thing to surround myself with. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really special. I'm glad that you took that year and a half. And that, as you said, it still doesn't feel like long enough. But I really emphasize that to people, like, don't let anyone make you feel like you have to rush things, because as we live in this culture where we feel like that we have to be efficient and get things done and move on, and actually these are really precious things. And actually sometimes I would think to myself, oh, that it's just material things, they don't matter, but they do. There are things that matter, and actually they hold a lot of memories and importance and significance for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that even because I fell into the trap of like, oh, like we had hundreds of items on our to-do list, and not one, like they're not small. My mom didn't know she was dying when she was admitted to the hospital, and then she passed away. And so like we had like big things to wrap up. But I think honestly, going through that to-do list was a way for me to avoid a little of the grief, because it was like, oh, like I get to just like knock this stuff out. And it didn't allow me to go to those places emotionally or give myself the space that maybe I could have used, but maybe that's what I needed at that time. It's so hard to judge our past selves for what we needed then.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like we also, my sisters and I it was hard just to coordinate a time for us to all come together and decide on what we were going to do with things. But it felt very practical. And it was almost like we felt like we couldn't get emotional, because then it would trigger, we would all get so emotional. So we all had to stay strong for each other. And I don't know, we do put on a lot of masks sometimes to sort of just get through it. But then, like you say, we can't judge ourselves because we were just getting through it, right?
Yeah, here we're surviving, and it's so hard to like heal, and when we're like in survival mode. Like, I don't know if those two are compatible.
I know. I always remember I was seeing this therapist at that time when we were like selling our family home and getting rid of all my mum's things. And that sounds horrible like that, but you know what I mean?
I know. You can only hold on to so much.
A lot of stuff, yeah. And this therapist, who I didn't particularly connect with at the time, but I always remember her saying, oh, you should do a ritual to say goodbye to the house, which I really wanted to do, but I had no real concept of how to do it back then. And I think that would have helped me a lot, because we didn't do it. I felt kind of shy and like I'm the youngest, and I'm not really, I didn't really know what to do. But I have a lot of recurring dreams about packing that house up still today. So I think perhaps for people who are listening, who maybe are in that position now of clearing out somebody's home and saying goodbye to a home and things, that you can formulate some sort of ritual around it, and that would potentially be really helpful.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that. So I lived in my mother's building. I lived downstairs from my mom because it was a family apartment. And my husband and I actually like wanted to move up there, but we didn't, because we ended up moving to California instead. And so we were selling her house. And so once all of the boxes were out and the house was empty, I took some like Palo Santo wood, and we went around to every room, and he spent a lot of time in that house as well, just because we've been together a long time. But we went around to every room, and like we both shared memories, and I shared memories of like things that happened and were meaningful in those spaces, which was really like a nice way to clear and cleanse for me, if that's helpful for anyone that's listening.
So. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We're getting to the end of our time together, Miriam, sadly, but is there anything that you would like to share that you haven't shared before we finish?
No, I think I'm coming up empty. I feel like we talked about so much.
I know. Well, I so appreciate you taking the time to speak to me, and I'm really, really excited about your book. You have such a powerful story, and I know that you're an amazing writer. So it's going to be a captivating, brilliant read. And I can't wait when it's launched and we can do another interview. And yeah, I can't wait to
Thank you.
So,
thank you so much, Tara.
Yeah, I'm wishing you the best of luck and a really wonderful 2022.
Thank you. You as well.
Yeah. So to everybody that's watching, thank you so much. Goodbye.